Title: The Betrayal. Part 1: The Setup. Chapter 1: An Ordinary Evening. Anna had always found solace in the quiet rhythms of her evenings at home. There was something comforting about the predictability of it all, the way the sun dipped behind the tall oaks, casting long golden shadows across the lawn, the hum of the cicadas as they began their nightly chorus, and the gentle rustle of the pine trees as they swayed in the evening breeze. It was the kind of life she had always dreamed of, and now she was living it. Their suburban home, a two-story house with a wraparound porch and ivy climbing up the brick walls, was nestled in a neighborhood that was both picturesque and private. It was a sanctuary, a place where she felt safe and content. Anna's younger sister Emily had been staying with them for the past few weeks, and Anna found herself relishing the time they spent together. The bond between the two sisters was something special. Something that had been forged over years of shared experiences, whispered secrets, and late-night conversations. Despite the 3-year gap between them, they were often mistaken for twins. Their resemblance went beyond just physical appearance. They moved with the same grace, laughed at the same jokes, and had an uncanny ability to finish each other's sentences. Their tastes and styles were almost identical, from the clothes they wore to the books they read. It was as if they were two halves of the same person. Anna had always been protective of Emily, feeling a sense of responsibility for her younger sister's happiness. Emily had been through a lot recently. Her long-term relationship had ended abruptly, leaving her heartbroken and unsure of what to do next. When Emily had called Anna in tears, Anna didn't hesitate to invite her to stay with them. "Come for as long as you need," she had said, and she meant it. Mark had readily agreed, his affection for Emily almost as strong as Anna's. Mark was the kind of husband Anna had always hoped she would find. He was attentive, loving, and had a way of making her feel like she was the most important person in the world. His deep blue eyes always sparkled when he looked at her, and his smile could melt away even the worst of days. They had met in college, where Anna had been immediately drawn to his quiet confidence and sense of humor. Over the years, their relationship had only grown stronger, built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Anna often found herself marveling at how lucky she was to have found someone like Mark. Mark had taken to Emily almost as soon as they met. He admired her quick wit and easygoing nature, and the three of them had fallen into an easy camaraderie. Their evenings together were a testament to the closeness they shared. It was a time for unwinding, for setting aside the stresses of the day and simply enjoying each other's company. They had developed a routine: dinner followed by a glass or two of wine, and then conversation that flowed as naturally as the night itself. This evening was no different. The three of them sat around the dining table, the remnants of a delicious meal spread before them. The soft glow of the overhead light bathed the room in a warm golden hue, and the air was filled with the rich aroma of roasted chicken, garlic, and herbs. Anna had outdone herself with dinner, as she often did when Emily was around. She enjoyed cooking for them, taking pleasure in watching Mark and Emily savor the food she had prepared. Emily leaned back in her chair, a contented smile on her face as she took another sip of wine. "Anna, this was amazing, as always," she said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. Anna smiled back, her heart swelling with pride and affection. "I'm glad you liked it. It's nice to have someone who appreciates my cooking," she teased, glancing at Mark, who grinned in response. Mark chuckled, raising his glass in a mock toast. "To the best chef in the world," he said, his words slightly slurred from the wine he had been steadily drinking throughout the evening. Anna laughed, clinking her glass against his. "You're just saying that because you're tipsy," she replied, though she knew he meant it. As the conversation continued, it drifted from one topic to another with the ease that only comes from being in the company of those who truly understand you. They talked about Emily's recent breakup, how she was coping, what her plans were going forward. Anna listened intently, offering advice and comfort, while Mark chimed in with his own thoughts, always careful to be supportive without being intrusive. They also discussed Anna's latest project at work. She worked as a graphic designer for a marketing firm, and her current project involved a major rebranding for a well-known company. It was challenging work, but Anna thrived on the creative energy it required. She shared her ideas with Mark and Emily, who both listened with interest, offering suggestions and encouragement. As the evening wore on, the wine flowed more freely, loosening their tongues and making the conversation even more animated. Mark, who had never been able to hold his liquor well, started to show the effects of the wine more noticeably. His speech became a little slower, his movements more languid, and eventually he excused himself to go to bed. "I think I've had enough for tonight," he said with a sheepish grin, pushing his chair back from the table. He stood up, a little unsteady on his feet, and leaned over to kiss Anna on the forehead. "Good night, love," he murmured, his voice soft and affectionate. "Good night," Anna replied, watching him with a fond smile as he made his way upstairs. She turned back to Emily, who was swirling the last of her wine in her glass, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Another glass?" Anna offered, reaching for the bottle. Emily hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Sure, why not? It's not like I have anywhere to be tomorrow," she said with a wry smile. Anna poured them both another glass, and they settled back into their conversation. Without Mark there, the tone shifted slightly, becoming more personal, more intimate. Emily opened up about her recent breakup in a way she hadn't before, sharing details that she had previously kept to herself. Anna listened with a mixture of sympathy and concern, offering support wherever she could. "I just don't know what I'm going to do now," Emily admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I thought he was the one, and now I just feel so lost." "You're not lost," Anna said gently. "You're just going through a rough patch, but you'll get through it. You're stronger than you think, Emily, and you have me and Mark. We'll help you get through this." Emily smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know. I just hate feeling like this, like I'm stuck in limbo. But it helps being here with you guys. It makes me feel safe." Anna reached across the table and took Emily's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You are safe, Emily. You always will be." They sat like that for a moment, the silence between them filled with unspoken understanding. Finally, Emily sighed and leaned back in her chair, glancing at the clock on the wall. "It's getting late," she said reluctantly. "I should probably get to bed, too." "Yeah, me too," Anna agreed, though she didn't move to get up just yet. Instead, she took another sip of her wine, savoring the warmth it spread through her. Emily stood up, stretching her arms above her head. "Do you mind if I borrow your nail file?" she asked. "I broke a nail earlier, and it's been bugging me all night." "Of course not. It's on the dresser in my bedroom. Help yourself," Anna replied, waving her hand in the direction of the stairs. "Thanks," Emily said, smiling gratefully before heading upstairs. Anna stayed behind, finishing her wine and basking in the quiet that had settled over the house. The evening had been perfect, just as she had hoped it would be. There was something deeply satisfying about these moments of connection, about the sense of togetherness that filled their home. She couldn't imagine her life without Mark or Emily in it. They were her world. But as Anna sat there, content and slightly buzzed from the wine, she had no idea that this ordinary evening was about to change everything. Chapter 2. The Temptation. Emily was still thinking about the conversation she had just shared with Anna as she made her way up the stairs. The warmth from the wine lingered in her veins, dulling the edges of her thoughts and making her feel pleasantly lightheaded. The house was quiet now, the only sounds the soft creaking of the floorboards beneath her feet and the distant hum of the air conditioning. As she approached Anna and Mark's bedroom, she hesitated for a moment outside the door. The room was partially open, and she could see the soft glow of the bedside lamp spilling out into the hallway, casting a warm, inviting light. It had always been a cozy room, with its pale blue walls, large bay window, and heavy oak furniture that Anna had painstakingly chosen for its timeless quality. The scent of lavender, Anna's favorite, hung faintly in the air, mixed with the muskier scent of Mark's cologne. Emily pushed the door open a bit wider and stepped inside, her eyes immediately drawn to the figure on the bed. Mark was lying on his back, one arm draped across his forehead, the other resting loosely at his side. His shirt was unbuttoned halfway, exposing the smooth, muscular expanse of his chest, and his legs were tangled in the sheets. His breathing was deep and even, but he stirred slightly as she entered, shifting to get more comfortable. The dim light from the lamp on the bedside table cast soft shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and jawline. His hair, usually so neat, was tousled from sleep, giving him a boyish look that made Emily's heart skip a beat. She stood frozen in the doorway, her gaze locked on him, a strange, unfamiliar feeling stirring in the pit of her stomach. She hadn't really thought of Mark in this way before. Sure, she had always known he was attractive, anyone with eyes could see that. But he had always been Anna's husband, and she had never allowed her mind to go down that path. But now, standing there in the semi-darkness, watching him sleep, something shifted inside her. He looked so vulnerable, so relaxed, and for the first time she found herself really noticing him, not just as her sister's husband, but as a man. Emily felt a flush rise to her cheeks, and she quickly looked away, berating herself for even thinking about Mark in such a way. She was only there for the nail file, nothing more. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, scanning the room for the dresser where Anna kept her things, but her eyes kept drifting back to Mark, drawn to the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way his lips parted slightly as he exhaled. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped further into the room, her movements slow and careful, as if she were afraid to wake him. The dresser was on the far side of the room, near the window. She walked over to it, her footsteps barely making a sound on the thick carpet. The nail file was exactly where Anna had said it would be, sitting in a small ceramic dish along with a few other odds and ends, hairpins, a bracelet, a couple of rings. She picked up the nail file and was about to leave when she heard a soft rustling sound behind her. She turned to see Mark shifting on the bed, his hands sliding across the sheets as if searching for something. His eyes were still closed, and for a moment Emily thought he was simply moving in his sleep. But then his hand reached out toward her, and before she could react, his fingers curled around her wrist. "Come here," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep, barely more than a whisper. His eyes were still closed, and there was a slight smile on his lips, as if he were having a pleasant dream. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Mark's grip was gentle but insistent, and she could feel the warmth of his skin against hers. He tugged on her wrist lightly, pulling her toward the bed. Her mind raced, panic and confusion warring with the strange, inexplicable desire that had taken hold of her. She knew she should pull away, should leave the room and pretend this never happened. But she didn't. Instead, she found herself stepping closer, her breath coming in shallow, rapid bursts. She told herself it was the wine, that she wasn't thinking clearly, that this was just a moment of weakness that she would soon regret. But even as these thoughts raced through her mind, she didn't stop. Mark pulled her down beside him, his arm wrapping around her waist as he nuzzled his face against her neck. "Anna," he mumbled, his voice filled with sleepy affection. He tightened his grip on her, his hand sliding up her back, and Emily's heart clenched painfully in her chest. He thought she was Anna. Of course he did. Why wouldn't he? They looked so much alike, especially in the dim light of the bedroom. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to get up and leave before things went any further, but her body refused to listen. Instead, she found herself leaning into him, her fingers brushing through his hair, her lips brushing against his forehead in a gesture that was both tender and filled with longing. "Mark," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the quiet of the room, barely audible even to her own ears. Mark's hand slipped under her shirt, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. He moved with the familiarity of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, his fingers tracing the curves of her body with practiced ease. Emily's breath hitched in her throat as she felt a rush of heat spread through her, the last remnants of rational thought slipping away. She knew this was wrong. She knew she should stop before it was too late, but she couldn't. The combination of the wine, Mark's touch, and the undeniable attraction she felt for him was too overwhelming. It was as if all the boundaries she had carefully maintained over the years had suddenly dissolved, leaving her vulnerable and exposed to desires she hadn't even known she had. Mark shifted, rolling over so that he was hovering above her, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was both gentle and insistent. Emily's eyes fluttered closed, and she found herself responding to the kiss, her hands sliding up his back, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, growing more passionate, more desperate, as if they were both trying to lose themselves in the moment, to forget everything but the heat of each other's bodies. Time seemed to blur as they gave in to the intensity of their desire, their movements becoming more frantic, more urgent. Mark's hands roamed over her body, and Emily felt herself responding in ways she had never imagined. She was lost in the sensation, in the thrill of being with someone she had always thought was off-limits. It wasn't until the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains that reality came crashing back. Emily's eyes snapped open, and she stared up at the ceiling, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. Mark stirred beside her, and as he blinked groggily, the fog of sleep began to lift from his mind. His gaze landed on Emily, and for a moment there was only confusion in his eyes. Then, slowly, the realization of what had happened began to sink in, and his expression shifted to one of horror. "Emily?" His voice was barely above a whisper, filled with disbelief and a growing sense of dread. Emily felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she pushed herself up, her hands trembling as she pulled the sheets around her. "Mark, she started, but the words caught in her throat, choking her. Mark sat up, running a hand through his hair, his face pale as the full weight of what they had done hit him. "Oh, God, what have we done?" They stared at each other in stunned silence, the gravity of their actions hanging heavily in the air between them. The room, which had once felt warm and safe, now seemed suffocating, the walls closing in on them as they struggled to comprehend the enormity of their mistake. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, the guilt and shame threatening to overwhelm her. She had crossed a line, betrayed her sister in the worst possible way, and for what? A moment of weakness? A foolish desire? She couldn't even bring herself to look at Mark, the man she had just slept with, the man who was supposed to be Anna's and Anna's alone. Mark finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse and filled with regret. "We have to tell her. We can't keep this from Anna." Emily nodded numbly, her mind still reeling. She knew he was right. They couldn't hide this. But the thought of facing Anna, of seeing the hurt and betrayal in her eyes, was almost too much to bear. As the first rays of sunlight crept across the floor, they both realized there was no going back. What was done could never be undone. Chapter 3. The morning after Emily awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains, her head throbbing with a relentless headache. The remnants of wine from the night before left a sour taste in her mouth, but it was the crushing weight of guilt that truly made her stomach churn. Her heart pounded erratically as the events of the previous night came rushing back with sickening clarity. She lay still for a moment, her eyes squeezed shut, praying that it was all just a terrible dream. But the warmth of the body beside her, the gentle rise and fall of Mark's breathing, confirmed her worst fears. Her breath hitched in her throat as she turned her head slowly to look at him. Mark was still asleep, his face peaceful, unaware of the storm brewing within her. For a fleeting second she considered staying there, sinking back into the oblivion of sleep where the consequences of their actions didn't exist. But the panic quickly set in, clawing its way up her throat and choking her with its intensity. She couldn't stay here, not like this, not with him. She had to get out, away from the bed, away from Mark, and most of all, away from the crushing guilt that was threatening to consume her. Moving as quietly as she could, Emily began to gather her things, her hands trembling so badly that she nearly dropped her phone as she grabbed it from the nightstand. The room, which had felt so intimate the night before, now seemed suffocating. Each breath she took feeling like it was filling her lungs with poison. Her mind raced as she tried to think of what to do next. She needed to leave, but where would she go? The guest room where she had been staying was out of the question. Anna might wake up and find her there. The last thing she wanted was to face her sister right now. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing Anna's face, of knowing what she had done. She decided to slip downstairs, hoping to find some quiet corner where she could collect her thoughts, maybe even figure out a way to tell Anna the truth, though the very idea made her feel like she was going to be sick. Emily moved as quickly as she dared, tiptoeing across the room and slipping out the door as quietly as possible. The hallway was dim and silent, the house still cloaked in the soft hush of early morning. She made her way down the stairs, each step creaking slightly under her weight. Her heart pounded with fear that one wrong move would wake Anna, that her sister would find her, and everything would come crashing down. Once downstairs, Emily felt a tiny bit of relief, but it was fleeting. The living room was bathed in the pale light of dawn, the furniture casting long shadows across the floor. She sank into the armchair by the window, pulling her knees up to her chest as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. She could still feel Mark's touch on her skin, the heat of his breath against her neck, and it made her feel dirty, like she was covered in a film of shame that she couldn't scrub away. Upstairs, Mark stirred, slowly coming awake. At first, there was only a vague sense of discomfort, a heaviness in his limbs and a pounding in his skull that he attributed to the wine. But as his mind began to clear, memories of the night before started to filter through, each one hitting him like a punch to the gut. He groaned, rolling onto his back, his hand coming up to rub at his face as the full realization of what he had done settled over him. A wave of nausea washed over him, and for a moment he thought he might actually be sick. He stared up at the ceiling, his mind racing as he tried to process everything. He had cheated on Anna with her sister. The thought was so repugnant, so utterly horrifying, that he couldn't wrap his mind around it. How could he have been so stupid, so reckless? He had ruined everything. Mark sat up slowly, his movements sluggish as if he were wading through molasses. His body ached, but it was nothing compared to the deep, gnawing sense of dread in the pit of his stomach. He had to tell Anna. He knew that. There was no way they could keep this from her. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal of the worst kind. But the very thought of confessing filled him with a fear so intense it left him breathless. He forced himself out of bed, his legs shaky as he stood. He felt like he was moving through a dream, everything around him slightly blurred and surreal. He dressed quickly, pulling on the first clothes he could find, not even bothering to button his shirt properly as he made his way downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the mantel. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, Mark saw Emily sitting in the armchair, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were trying to make herself as small as possible. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her face was pale, a stark contrast to the warm light of the early morning that was slowly filling the room. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. The weight of their shared guilt hung heavily in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Mark opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? Sorry? That didn't even begin to cover it. Before either of them could break the silence, they heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Emily's eyes widened in panic, and Mark felt his heart lurch in his chest. Anna was awake. Anna entered the living room still in her pajamas, her hair slightly tousled from sleep. She looked at the two of them, her brow furrowing slightly as she took in their strained expressions. "Good morning," she said, her voice still soft with sleep, though there was a note of concern in it. "Are you two okay?" The tension in the room was palpable, so thick it was almost suffocating. Emily felt her throat tighten, and she struggled to find her voice. "Yeah, we're fine," she said quickly, forcing a smile that felt all wrong on her face. "Just didn't sleep well." Mark nodded in agreement, though he couldn't quite meet Anna's eyes. "Yeah, must have been the wine," he added, trying to sound casual, though his voice was strained and uneven. Anna studied them for a moment, her sharp eyes taking in the way they both avoided each other's gaze, the awkwardness in their movements. She wasn't easily fooled, and Mark knew it. She had always been able to see through him, to pick up on the slightest change in his demeanor. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his spine as she looked between him and Emily, her expression growing more concerned. "Are you sure everything's okay?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. "You both seem a little off this morning." Emily's heart raced, and she could feel the blood draining from her face. She had always been a terrible liar, and she knew that if Anna pressed further, she would crumble. She could already feel the tears welling up in her eyes, threatening to spill over. She had to get out of there before she completely broke down. "I'm fine, just need some fresh air," Emily mumbled, quickly standing up and heading for the door before Anna could stop her. She could feel Mark's eyes on her as she left the room, but she didn't dare look back. Once outside, Emily leaned against the side of the house, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The cool morning air did little to calm her racing heart. She felt like she was on the verge of a breakdown, her emotions teetering on the edge of a cliff. She had to tell Anna, she knew that, but the very thought of it made her feel like she was going to be sick. Inside, Mark watched Emily go, his stomach churning with guilt and fear. He knew what she was thinking. He was thinking the same thing. They couldn't keep this from Anna, but how could they possibly tell her? He could already see the hurt and betrayal in her eyes, could already hear the pain in her voice as she realized what they had done. The very thought of it made him want to run, to hide from the consequences of his actions, but he knew he couldn't do that. He had to face this, had to take responsibility for what he had done. He just didn't know how. He felt completely and utterly lost. Anna watched them both, her concern growing. She could sense that something was very wrong, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She had never seen Mark or Emily act this way before, and it was unsettling. She felt a knot of anxiety form in her stomach as she tried to figure out what was going on. After breakfast, Emily couldn't take it any longer. The guilt was eating her alive, and she knew she couldn't keep it inside any longer. She pulled Anna aside, her hands trembling, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anna, I need to talk to you," she said, her eyes filling with tears. Anna's heart skipped a beat. The look in Emily's eyes was one of pure anguish, and it made her stomach twist in fear. "What is it, Emily? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle, though she could feel her own anxiety rising. Emily took a deep breath, her entire body shaking. I have to tell you something, and I don't even know where to start," she began, her voice breaking. Anna felt her chest tighten as she watched her sister struggle to speak. "Just tell me, Emily. Whatever it is, we'll get through it," she said, though her own heart was pounding with dread. The words came tumbling out of Emily in a rush, each one cutting deeper than the last. She confessed everything, how it had started with just a moment of weakness, how she had let herself get swept up in the heat of the moment, how she had betrayed Anna in the worst way possible. As she spoke, she expected Anna to react with anger, to lash out at her for what she had done. But as she looked up at her sister, she saw something that shocked her to her core. Anna's face was pale, but there was no anger there. Instead, there was a cold, calculating look in her eyes that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. Anna listened to the confession in silence, her expression unreadable. When Emily finally finished, the room was deathly quiet. The air seemed to crackle with tension, and Emily felt like she could barely breathe. Finally, Anna spoke, her voice calm but icy. "You really thought you could get away with this, didn't you?" she said, her words cutting through the air like a knife. Emily's heart sank. She had expected anger, tears, maybe even a slap. But this cold, detached response was so much worse. She felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her, leaving her suspended in a freefall of despair. Anna's eyes were sharp as they bore into Emily's. "You think I didn't notice the way you two were acting this morning? How awkward you both were. I'm not stupid, Emily. I've seen the way you look at him." Emily's mouth went dry. "Anna, she started, but Anna cut her off with a wave of her hand. "Don't," Anna said, her voice firm. "Don't insult me by pretending this was just a one-time thing. I know you've had feelings for Mark for a long time, and now you've finally acted on them." Emily shook her head frantically. "No, Anna. It wasn't like that. I swear it just happened. I wasn't thinking—" "But you were thinking, weren't you?" Anna interrupted, her voice cold. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Emily's vision blurred as tears streamed down her face. "Anna, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. Please, you have to believe me." Anna regarded her sister for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Emily standing there, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Chapter 4. The revelation. Anna sat in the living room, her back ramrod straight and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her gaze was fixed on a spot just beyond Emily, who sat across from her, eyes red and swollen from crying. The room was thick with tension, the air almost suffocating in its heaviness. The events of the morning had left a bitter taste in Anna's mouth, a sourness that had nothing to do with the remnants of last night's wine. When Emily first began to speak, her voice trembling and barely audible, Anna had felt a surge of disbelief. She listened, her heart hammering in her chest, as Emily stumbled over her words, recounting in halting detail the events of the previous night. The horror of what she was hearing seemed to unfold in slow motion, each word twisting the knife deeper into her heart. But as Emily's confession continued, that initial shock began to harden into something cold and implacable. Anna's expression remained eerily calm, her face a mask of composure, though inside she was a maelstrom of emotions. Betrayal, anger, disbelief, and most of all, an overwhelming sense of hurt that felt like it was tearing her apart from the inside out. Her mind raced, each thought coming fast and furious as she tried to process the enormity of what her sister was telling her. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal of the deepest kind, one that shattered the very foundation of the trust she had always placed in Emily and Mark. When Emily finally finished speaking, her words hanging in the air like a death sentence, a long, heavy silence descended over the room. Anna's eyes remained fixed on that same spot beyond her sister, her mind working furiously to make sense of it all. It was as if a wall had gone up inside her, a barrier that kept the flood of emotions at bay, allowing her to think with a clarity that was both chilling and calculating. "I see," Anna finally said, her voice disturbingly calm, almost detached. Her words were measured, each one carefully chosen. "You've made a mistake, Emily. Both of you have." Emily's tears flowed freely now, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. "Anna, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, you have to believe me," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of her guilt. But Anna didn't seem to hear her. Or rather, she heard her, but the words meant nothing to her. The apologies, the tears, they were all just noise, background static to the thoughts that were now consuming her. Her mind was focused on one thing and one thing only: how to make them pay for what they had done. Anna's eyes slowly shifted to meet Emily's, and the coldness in them made Emily's breath catch in her throat. There was no hint of forgiveness there, no sign of the sister she had always known to be kind, understanding, and loving. Instead, there was something hard, unyielding, a resolve that was as frightening as it was resolute. "You're right, Emily," Anna said, her voice still eerily calm. "You didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. Both of you did." Emily shook her head frantically, trying to make Anna understand. "It was a mistake, Anna, a horrible, terrible mistake. Please, just let me try to make it right." A bitter smile tugged at the corners of Anna's lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Make it right?" she echoed, her tone laced with an icy sarcasm. "How exactly do you plan to do that, Emily? How do you make something like this right?" Emily faltered, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for the right words, but there were none. She knew that. There was nothing she could say that would undo what had happened, nothing that would erase the pain she had caused. Her tears continued to fall, her voice small and broken as she whispered, "I don't know, Anna. I don't know. But I'll do anything you ask. Please, just don't hate me." Anna leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she studied her sister. There was a part of her, buried deep beneath the layers of hurt and anger, that wanted to reach out to Emily, to comfort her, to tell her that it was all going to be okay. But that part was quickly smothered by the cold, calculating part of her that was already planning her next move. "Don't hate you?" Anna repeated, her voice a soft, dangerous whisper. "I don't hate you, Emily. I don't even hate Mark. No, what I feel, it's something else entirely." The room seemed to grow colder, the very air turning to ice as Anna's words hung between them. Emily shivered, a chill running down her spine as she looked into her sister's eyes and saw the steely determination there. It was a look she had never seen on Anna's face before, and it terrified her. Anna rose from her seat with a slow, deliberate grace, her movements almost too calm, too controlled. She walked over to the window, her back to Emily, and stared out at the peaceful suburban street that seemed so far removed from the turmoil inside the house. The morning light streamed through the glass, casting long shadows across the floor, but it did nothing to warm the coldness that had settled in Anna's heart. "You've taken something from me," Anna said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, yet each word was laced with venom. "Something that I can never get back. You and Mark, you've broken something that can't be fixed." Emily stood up, her legs trembling as she took a hesitant step toward her sister. "Anna, please, don't," Anna said sharply, cutting her off. She turned to face Emily, her expression hard and unforgiving. "Don't come any closer. I don't want your apologies, Emily. They mean nothing to me now." Emily froze, her heart breaking as she realized just how far she had fallen in her sister's eyes. The bond they had once shared, the closeness that had defined their relationship, was now shattered beyond repair, and it was all her fault. Anna took a deep breath, steadying herself as she made her decision. "You want to make it right? Fine. Then you and Mark will both confess to him that what happened was mutual. He thinks it was a mistake. You make him believe it was just as much your fault as his." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Anna, no, I can't." "Oh, but you can," Anna interrupted, her voice steely. "You will, because if you don't, I'll make sure that everyone knows what happened. Our friends, our family, everyone." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. "You wouldn't." Anna's smile was cold, devoid of any warmth. "Try me." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily felt like she was suffocating under the weight of Anna's words, the finality of her tone. There was no way out, no way to undo what had been done. She had no choice but to do as Anna demanded. Anna's eyes softened slightly, but there was no kindness in them, only a cold calculation. "You and Mark will live with this, Emily. You'll live with the knowledge of what you've done and the consequences it brings, and you'll live with the fear that one day I might decide to let everyone know the truth." Emily nodded numbly, tears streaming down her face. She had never felt so lost, so completely and utterly defeated. Anna turned away from her, dismissing her with a flick of her hand. "Go. I don't want to see you right now." Emily hesitated for a moment, her heart breaking as she realized that this might be the last time she and Anna would ever be close. But she knew that there was nothing she could do to fix it, no words that could make things right again. With a heavy heart, she turned and walked out of the room, the weight of her sister's words crushing her with every step. As the door closed behind her, Anna stood alone in the living room, the silence wrapping around her like a shroud. She felt a strange sense of satisfaction, a cold, hollow victory that did nothing to ease the ache in her chest. The betrayal had cut deep, and the wound was still raw, but there was a certain grim pleasure in knowing that Emily and Mark would suffer the consequences of their actions. But as the minutes ticked by, that satisfaction began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of emptiness. Anna's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall, its ticking suddenly unbearably loud in the quiet room. She had won, hadn't she? She had taken control, exacted her revenge. So why did she feel so hollow inside? Anna's thoughts spiraled, the anger and hurt that had driven her now leaving a void that she didn't know how to fill. She had always been strong, always prided herself on her ability to handle anything that life threw at her. But this was different. The betrayal had shaken her to her core, leaving her adrift in a sea of emotions that she couldn't seem to navigate. And then, as she stood there alone in the quiet of her home, a thought occurred to her, one that sent a shiver down her spine. Revenge was supposed to bring closure, to ease the pain, but it hadn't. It had only deepened the wound, leaving her more lost and broken than before. Anna sank back into the chair, her mind racing with the implications of what she had done. She had pushed Emily away, forced her to share the burden of guilt with Mark, but in doing so, she had also severed the one bond that might have helped her heal. The silence of the room was oppressive, the emptiness around her a stark contrast to the turmoil inside. And as the tears finally began to fall, Anna realized that in her quest for revenge, she had lost something far more precious than she could ever have imagined. Chapter 5. planning the payback. Anna sat alone in the dim light of the study, the silence around her thick and oppressive. The events of the morning had left her reeling, but beneath the swirling emotions of hurt and betrayal, a cold determination began to take shape. She knew that the path forward required more than just anger. It required careful, calculated planning. If Mark and Emily thought they could betray her and walk away unscathed, they were sorely mistaken. As she stared at the papers on her desk, the beginnings of a plan started to form in her mind. This wouldn't be a hasty, impulsive act of revenge. No, Anna was going to play the long game. She would let them think they were safe, that she was willing to forgive and forget, while in reality she would be weaving a web around them, tightening it slowly until they had no escape. Anna's mind raced with possibilities. Simply leaving Mark or confronting them both with her knowledge would be too easy, too clean. They needed to suffer as she had suffered, to feel the slow, creeping dread of their inevitable downfall. She would give them hope, let them believe they were going to get away with it, and then, when they were most vulnerable, she would strike. The first step was to maintain the facade of the loving wife and sister. If she acted too soon or showed her hand too early, the plan would be ruined. She needed to keep them off balance, unsure of where they stood with her. The tension between them would be her greatest weapon, and she would wield it with precision. Anna began by subtly manipulating situations to make both Mark and Emily uncomfortable. She started with small, almost imperceptible actions, planting seeds of doubt and fear in their minds. She knew Mark's routines, his habits, and she used that knowledge to her advantage. The first morning after Emily's confession, Anna woke early and prepared breakfast as usual, but this time she left small, suggestive clues for Mark to find. A lipstick stain on his coffee cup, the shade identical to the one Emily had worn the night before. A scarf, one of Emily's, draped casually over the back of a chair in their bedroom. The first time Mark saw these things, he hesitated, a flicker of guilt crossing his face, but Anna pretended not to notice, chatting with him, as if nothing was amiss. Next, she began to make pointed comments during dinner, seemingly innocent on the surface, but laced with hidden meaning. "You know, Mark," she would say, her voice light and conversational, "it's amazing how easy it is to mistake one person for another when you're tired or distracted." She would smile sweetly as she said it, watching the way Mark's expression tightened, the way Emily's eyes darted nervously between them. She arranged for awkward encounters between them, moments where they would be forced to confront the reality of what they had done. One evening, Anna suggested they all go out to dinner, choosing a restaurant that she knew was one of Mark and Emily's favorites. Throughout the meal, she made sure to steer the conversation toward uncomfortable topics: infidelity, trust, betrayal, watching with satisfaction as the tension grew palpable. At home, Anna began leaving suggestive notes around the house, each one carefully crafted to be just ambiguous enough to unsettle them without giving away her knowledge. "Secrets have a way of coming out," she wrote on a note she left in Mark's coat pocket. "Trust is the foundation of any relationship," she scribbled on a piece of paper and slipped into Emily's purse. Each note was signed with a simple, elegant A, as if to remind them that she was always there, always watching. The tension grew daily, a thick, suffocating presence that hung over the house like a storm cloud. Mark and Emily began to grow paranoid, their guilt gnawing at them as they tried to navigate the minefield that Anna had created. They became more distant, not only from Anna but also from each other. The once close bond between Mark and Emily began to fray under the weight of their shared guilt and the pressure of Anna's subtle manipulations. Anna, meanwhile, continued to play her role perfectly. She was the picture of grace and composure, never once allowing her mask to slip. She was kind to Emily, attentive to Mark, and outwardly nothing seemed amiss. But behind the facade, Anna's mind was always working, always plotting her next move. She took pleasure in the small victories, the moments when she could see the fear in their eyes, the doubt that crept into their voices. Each time Mark flinched at one of her pointed comments, or Emily hesitated before speaking, Anna felt a surge of satisfaction. This was only the beginning, she reminded herself. The real revenge was still to come. One day, as she was going through the mail, an idea struck her. It was so perfect, so deliciously wicked, that she almost laughed out loud. She would let them think they had escaped, that the worst was over, and then she would orchestrate the final act of her revenge. But for that, she needed time, and she needed to be patient. In the meantime, Anna continued to chip away at them, slowly but surely. She found subtle ways to make Mark doubt Emily and to make Emily question Mark's loyalty. She would accidentally mention seeing Mark talking to a woman at the grocery store or make a comment about how close Emily seemed to be getting to one of her male friends. It was all part of the plan, creating cracks in their relationship that she would exploit later. The wedge she drove between them grew deeper with each passing day. Mark became more withdrawn, spending long hours at work or out with friends, avoiding being alone with Anna. Emily, on the other hand, became increasingly anxious, her guilt weighing heavily on her. She started to withdraw from social activities, making excuses to avoid spending time with Mark and Anna, her fear of slipping up and revealing the truth growing stronger. Anna watched it all with a cold, calculating eye. Every awkward glance, every strained conversation was a victory in her book, a sign that her plan was working. And she knew that when the time was right, she would deliver the final blow, the one that would ensure they both understood the full extent of their betrayal. For now, though, she was content to let the tension simmer, knowing that every day it grew stronger, pulling them further apart. The web she had spun around them was tightening, and soon enough they would find themselves trapped with no way out. And when that moment came, Anna would be ready. Chapter 6. The Seeds of Doubt. Anna's plan to exact revenge on Mark and Emily was meticulously crafted, each step designed to create a web of suspicion and isolation that would ensure they suffered for their betrayal. Her first strategy was to turn Mark against Emily, planting seeds of doubt that would grow into a full-blown paranoia. Anna began her campaign subtly. During casual conversations, she would drop seemingly innocent comments that suggested Emily might not be as trustworthy as she appeared. "You know, Mark," she would say with a thoughtful tone, "Emily's been spending a lot of time with that new co-worker of hers. It's odd, don't you think? She's never mentioned him before." The insinuations were veiled enough to seem like ordinary observations, but they were carefully calculated to sow discord. Mark's initial reaction was one of dismissal, but as Anna continued to pepper their conversations with similar hints, the seeds of doubt began to take root. He noticed how Emily's phone seemed to always be buzzing with messages, or how she would quickly hide her screen whenever he walked into the room. Anna made sure to keep the conversation light and offhand, but each comment was designed to erode Mark's trust in Emily. At the same time, Anna worked tirelessly to isolate Emily, making her feel increasingly alone and guilty. She would arrange social gatherings where Emily was the only one who didn't fit in, subtly excluding her from conversations and activities. During these gatherings, Anna would act as though everything was perfectly normal, but her actions were a clear message that Emily was no longer part of their circle. Emily, feeling the weight of guilt and isolation, found herself on edge. She started to withdraw from everyone, including Mark. The guilt of her betrayal, combined with Anna's calculated coldness, pushed her to the brink of a breakdown. Her once vibrant and outgoing personality began to erode, replaced by a shell of the person she had been. She avoided Mark as much as possible, unable to face him without feeling the crushing weight of what had happened. Mark, meanwhile, was struggling under the dual weight of his own guilt and the insidious doubts Anna had planted in his mind. His drinking increased as he sought to numb the growing paranoia that plagued him. He started to suspect that Anna knew more than she was letting on. Every time he tried to bring up the subject, Anna would deflect, skillfully changing the topic or responding with a vague comment that left him more confused and anxious. Anna's ability to maintain her facade was flawless. She continued to be the loving, attentive wife and sister on the surface, while underneath, she was orchestrating a carefully planned campaign of psychological warfare. Mark and Emily, each dealing with their own issues, were too entangled in their own turmoil to recognize the true source of their distress. Chapter 7. The Final Blow. As Anna's machinations reached their crescendo, she decided it was time to deliver the final devastating blow. she meticulously planned a dinner party, inviting a select group of close friends, including Mark and Emily. The dinner was to be the stage upon which she would reveal her masterstroke, a dramatic culmination of her carefully laid plans. The evening began with a sense of normalcy. Anna greeted her guests with a warm smile, her demeanor impeccable as she played the gracious host. The table was set beautifully, with candles casting a soft glow over the elegantly arranged dishes. The atmosphere was one of casual celebration, a perfect facade for the storm that was about to unfold. As dinner progressed, Anna made a toast, expressing her gratitude for the presence of her friends and the love she felt for her husband and sister. Her words were measured and heartfelt, but there was an undercurrent of tension that none of the guests could quite place. Mark and Emily exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something was off but unable to pinpoint what it was. The conversation flowed freely, but Anna began to steer it towards more personal and sensitive topics. She dropped hints about trust, infidelity, and betrayal, each comment designed to unsettle Mark and Emily. Her comments were wrapped in layers of casual conversation, but their impact was unmistakable. Mark's face grew pale, his discomfort evident, while Emily's hands trembled as she clutched her glass. As the evening wore on, Anna could see the anxiety building in both Mark and Emily. Their attempts to engage in the conversation were half-hearted, their smiles forced. The room was thick with unspoken tension, and Anna reveled in the control she wielded. Finally, as dessert was being served, Anna decided it was time for the grand reveal. She stood up, her expression shifting from one of polite conversation to one of steely determination. With a calm, controlled voice, she addressed the room. "I've been meaning to share something with all of you," she began. "There's been a lot of talk about trust and honesty lately, and I think it's time we addressed it openly." Anna then proceeded to lay out the evidence she had gathered over the past few weeks, texts, emails, and photos. Each piece was displayed with a sense of finality, the evidence clear and damning. The room fell silent as the guests, including Mark and Emily, processed the shocking revelation. The once jovial atmosphere was replaced by a stifling silence, the air heavy with shock and disbelief. Mark and Emily's faces were masks of horror as they tried to process what was unfolding. They stammered and fumbled, their explanations falling flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence. Apologies were made, but they were too little, too late. Anna had already made up her mind, and the damage was done. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. In the days that followed, Anna's actions were swift and decisive. She filed for divorce, ensuring that the separation was as clean and efficient as possible. The divorce proceedings were a blur of legal jargon and paperwork, but Anna was unyielding. She took half of everything Mark owned, leaving him with nothing but the ruins of their life together. The emotional fallout was equally harsh. Anna cut ties with Emily completely, severing all contact and leaving her sister devastated and alone. The bond that had once been so strong was now shattered, the love and trust between them replaced by a chasm of betrayal and hurt. Mark, now left with nothing, was a shell of the man he had once been. He lost not only his wife, but also his home and his reputation. The guilt he felt was overwhelming, compounded by the loss of everything he had worked for. His once stable world had crumbled, and he was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. Emily, unable to cope with the intense guilt and the loss of her sister's love, decided to move away. She packed up her belongings and left behind the place where everything had gone wrong, hoping that a fresh start in a new location might offer her a chance to escape the memories and rebuild her life. As for Anna, she emerged from the wreckage of her marriage and family with a sense of cold satisfaction. She had exacted her revenge, making Mark and Emily pay for their betrayal in a way that was as thorough as it was calculated. She felt no remorse for what she had done. Instead, there was a grim satisfaction in knowing that they had suffered as she had. Anna's life moved forward with a new sense of freedom. She no longer had the burden of a betraying husband or a disloyal sister. Yet despite her victory, there was an emptiness that lingered, a reminder that even in her quest for revenge, she had lost something precious, a part of herself that had once been full of love and trust. As she settled into her new life, Anna found that the satisfaction of her revenge did little to fill the void left by the betrayal. The pain and the memories remained, a reminder that some wounds run deeper than any act of retribution can heal.